Hello, my name is Greg Pingle, and I'm a system engineer with Cisco Systems. Today I'd like to give you a real quick overview of a relatively new feature we have called Easy Virtual Network. First, let's take a step back and discuss what our network virtualization solution means. And this is the creation of logical partitions of an actual physical infrastructure, creating virtual networks that are isolated from each other so that you can have multiple overlays of a virtual network on top of one common physical infrastructure. Traditionally, this is done for regulatory compliance for segregated departments, or if you merge with a new company and you want to keep your infrastructure and security separate, or if you have an outsourced, say, IT department or different department where you need to have compliance such as HIPAA or Sarbox, or just any other regulatory compliance that you need to logically separate the resources from each other on a common physical infrastructure. Now, buying separate physical infrastructure to accomplish this would be extremely expensive, so we've created a solution traditionally known as VRF-Lite, and VRF stands for Virtual Routing and Forwarding, where we have the ability to carve out these virtual networks on top of a common physical infrastructure. This can be a one-to-many, where we have the one physical infrastructure and many virtual networks, and the perspective of the end user is that they're being connected to a dedicated network of their own with an independent set of policies, routing decisions, QoS, sometimes security, so that they have logical separation from each other department and the physical infrastructure. Some of the challenges with traditional enterprise network virtualization, traditionally being VRF-Lite, is that having end-to-end network virtualization is a very large configuration. There are more virtual networks that you create, the more complicated and large this configuration can get, increasing the chances for configuration errors and just time-consuming large configurations that are complicated. Each VRF needs to be configured on all routers and switches across the physical infrastructure, and this is accomplished using sub-interfaces, one for each virtual network. Sub-interfaces on a .1Q trunk are assigned to a VRF network defined in the global configuration, and that is applied to each trunk. Another challenge is accomplishing sharing services such as DNS and DHCP. This is complicated because traditionally with VRF-Lite you need to create route import and export using BGP, which is not always very well known by enterprise and especially smaller network admins for sharing services across the logical networks. So you don't have to buy, again, common infrastructure for each logical network. And it's not easy to monitor and troubleshoot a virtualized environment. So Easy Virtual Network, in summary, really shines on your LAN trunks. Again, there's a significant simplification in the configuration because the VRFs are pre-provisioned on each trunk. In addition, the shared services and route replication can be now accomplished via an interior gateway protocol such as EIGRP or OSPF, and BGP is not required. The IGPs, like EIGRP and OSPF, are typically much more well known by enterprise network admins, and this is a much more familiar environment for them to configure. It also offers enhanced troubleshooting and usability in a easy virtual network because we have just the main physical interface that we need to look at when monitoring and troubleshooting VRF EVN type environments. Again, traditionally you need a sub interface on an 802.1q trunk per VRF in addition to the global config, which is typically the physical interface itself, and sub interfaces are used for each VRF. This is currently shipping on the Catalyst 6500 and recently has been introduced on the Catalyst 4500. To compare VRF-Lite to Easy Virtual Network is mainly you can see in what's called the VNet trunk. So let's first look at the VRF-Lite configuration, on the left, you see that we have our main physical interface, and then we have sub-interfaces on a .1Q trunk tagged and assigned to the particular VRF instance that that sub-interface belongs to. You have to repeat this for each virtual network that you have, and scalability can be quite an issue because of the large configuration, especially if you have a lot of virtual networks overlaid on top of your physical network. To the right, we see the EVN configuration, where here what's different in our global configuration, we define our VRFs, and here is where we assign our essentially our 802.1q tag. It is assigned to the global VRF definition, which is called a VNet tag, and the VNet tag number corresponds to what the subinterface number would be in a VRF-Lite configuration. And so you define all your VNet tags and VRF definitions in your global config, and you simply put it on the main physical interface with one command, which is called VNet trunk, and it automatically populates the VLAN tags into the physical interface without having to define all the sub-interfaces for each VRF. The good news is that this is 100% compatible with VRF-Lite, because EVN is actually VRF-Lite in disguise. EVN is a VRF-Lite configuration which has been simplified by using command macros so that less configuration is needed and deployment can be sped up, and that it reduces configuration errors and it's much easier to monitor, and you're only dealing with a single physical interface on your trunks, and each trunk is inheriting the VRFs based on what your global configuration definition is. Here you can see the advantage is on the scalability is the more virtual networks and the more neighbors you have, the more VRF subinterfaces you have. You multiply virtual networks by neighbors and you get how many VRF subinterfaces you need. So in 30 virtual networks, you would have, say, 4 neighbors on a particular router. That router would need 120 VRF subinterfaces to accomplish having the 30 virtual networks going to 4 different neighbors. Well, with VRF or EVN, you're able to have only 4 VRF trunks. Again, the VNet trunk command, you only need to put on one physical interface. So it's one point-to-point trunk configuration per physical interface, significantly reducing the configuration size and complexity. Here we can see NetFlow deployed alongside with Easy Virtual Network. So in an EVN configuration, when you do a typical show run, it's just going to show that you have a physical interface. Your main physical interface has the VNet trunk command on it. And in this case, we're applying Flexible NetFlow version 9 to this configuration with the IP flow monitor commands for input and output. All of the virtual networks that are defined in the global configuration will inherit these commands into their own configuration. And again, if you remember in the global configuration that the VRF definitions include a VNet trunk command with a subinterface ID or a number that actually defines what that subinterface would be. So if you want to see this configuration in its native form of VRF-Lite, since EVN is VRF-Lite, you just type in the show derived config, and here you'll be able to see all of your subinterfaces as you would typically see it, as if you configured this natively in a VRF-Lite configuration to begin with. And as you can see, by default, the flexible NetFlow commands that are configured on the main interfaces are inherited to all of the VRF subinterfaces. The future of EVN includes the ability to have EVN over a WAN trunk. We're able to accomplish this using GRE tunnels, and again, as you would typically configure GRE in a encapsulated configuration, this also works for VPN. So your tunnel interface gets the VNet trunk command, and in the same way it works on a LAN trunk, it would work on a tunnel interface. This has yet to be released, but it is a future roadmap item that we plan on releasing down the road. And here you see again, we have our VRF definitions where we tag our virtual network according to the VRF of our choice. In this situation, we have red, green, and yellow, and then we apply the VNet trunk command to the tunnel interface. If you'd like to know more information, you can just go to www.cisco.com/go/EVN for our wealth of information on our data sheets and our Q&A and white papers. And we also have a mailer at evn@cisco.com you can access if you have even more further questions. And I thank you for your time and listening to the advantages of EVN deployments over VRF-Lite. And thank you again for using Cisco, and have a great day.